Greetings builders, Daniel here and welcome to another meta builds video. Today I'm gonna show you 3 builds that are among the most played in the 5th week of the Trial of the Ancestors League. If you wanna try any of those, you can find the links for POBs and complete guide in the video description. Now let's take a look at them. Let's start with this build that is becoming more and more popular among high level players. I'm talking about the Frostblade Trickster with the Shadow class. Frostblade is an awesome skill that hits enemies with a melee attack and creates many projectiles to kill the whole screen. It's an easy and fun build for beginners. To list the pros of this build, I would start with the amount of damage you can get with very little investment. Besides that, this build also counts with the Trickster Ascendance to be super fast and tanky. It has 7 Frenzy charges for extra damage and speed, a lot of defensive layers, and keeps enemies always frozen, granting a smooth ride. Now to list the cons, the first thing that comes to mind is that claws have a small range and it's hard to get extra range on the side of the passive tree you use. Because of that, we always have to be very close to bosses, which is a vulnerable position, but don't worry, they are going to be frozen most of the time. As for budget, this build is not expensive at all. You can get it destroying early in game maps with only around 80 chaos. To comfort advance to yellow maps, I recommend investing around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines, but you can totally do it with less. Don't forget that on PoEbuilds.net you can find a list with all the equipment that you need to buy for this build, with direct links for examples being sold by other players. You only need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first and most important is the Heat Shiver helmet that grants over 100% of your cold damage as extra fire damage against frozen enemies. This not only grants a huge amount of damage but also triggers our Trinity. Next, we also need the Yoke of Suffer amulet that causes all of our elemental damage to shock. This way our enemies are going to take a lot more damage. For clear speed, I'll give this one 9 out of 10. As mentioned before, you have 7 Frenzy charges and a huge effect of elusive that grants this build a lot of extra movement speed. Besides that, Frost Blades can also kill a lot of enemies at once. The boss damage is also amazing and deserves 10 out of 10. With very little investment, you are going to turn bosses into popsicles and kill them in less than a second. It's just incredible. For the survivability, I'll also give it 9 out of 10. This build has over 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion, spell suppression, fortify, and even a trickster buff that causes you to take 40% less damage. Above all of that, your enemies are going to be always frozen, so it will be hard for you to die. Next, we have a build that combines 2 meta skills, the Tornado Shot and the Ice Spear. I'm talking about the Cast on Critical Tornado Shot Ice Spear Deadeye with the Ranger class. This build combines all the power of a cast on critical build with the safety of a ranged attack. It has an amazing clear speed and it's capable of a huge boss damage. To list the pros of this build, I would start with this amazing clear speed you are seeing. Look how satisfying it is to catch so many ice spears from our tornado shot projectiles. I assure you that you will love clearing maps with this beauty. This character is awesome for bosses as well. It deals a lot of single target damage, even from a great distance. Above all, it's also very safe to play it. You kill monsters and map bosses from afar, keeping them frozen into place. And for those bosses that are immune to freeze, you can also keep a safe distance and destroy them anyway. If by any means they manage to reach you, you still have over 90% chance to evade attacks, high chance to suppress spell damage, and high armor. Now to list the cons, I will start saying that this build isn't for everyone. You need a lot of currency to put it together. Another issue is that it isn't easy to build because it needs many specific rare items. As for budget, this build will need at least 15 divine orbs to put together. As I said, it's an expensive one. You need 3 mandatory unique items for this build. The first one is the Asnaf's Mark helmet that triggers Socrates skills when you attack. This grants even more ice spears. We also need the Malone's mechanism. This one is the only quiver that has sockets. We're going to use those extra sockets to debuff bosses for a lot more damage. Finally, we also need 2 Intuitive Leap unique jewels to save many points in our passive tree. For clear speed, this one is surely a 10 out of 10. Playing with this build is not only fast but also extremely satisfying. The boss damage also deserves 10 out of 10. You end up casting many ice spears and all of them can hit the target, causing an incredible shotgun effect. For the survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10. This build can do everything from a safe distance. It freezes enemies, it has a huge amount of evasion, armor and spell suppression. It will be hard to die if you always mind your position on guardians and pinnacle bosses. And finally, since Flicker Strikes is still very popular in this league, here's another example of Flicker build, the Infernal Flicker Strike Ascendant with the Scion class. This build uses the unique sword Auto Sacrifice to sustain the frenzy charges needed for you to keep flickering, but that's not any Auto's Flicker build. This one also chills and shocks enemies for a lot more damage, clear speed and survivability. To list the pros of this build, I would of course start with its clear speed. Flicker is just incredibly fast and super cool to play. This build also counts with an amazing boss damage and high survivability. Now, to list the cons, the first thing that comes to my mind is that you're always very close to enemies, which is a vulnerable position. Another issue is that you have little control over your character, making it hard on bosses where you need to mind your position or attack the right enemy. As for budget, you can get it destroying early in game maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfort but advanced 3 yellow maps, I recommend investing around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines. You need 3 mandatory unique items for this build. The first and most important is the Auto Sacrifice sword that allows you to maintain your frenzy charges always up even while flickering. Next, we also need the Call of the Void ring that causes your attacks to chill and shatter enemies. This ring might be a little expensive during the first days of a new league, but don't worry, you'll be fine without it while waiting for the prices to drop. Finally, we also need the Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of our damage to be able to shock enemies for a lot more damage. For clear speed, this build is surely a 10 out of 10. As any other Flicker build, this one is also insanely fast, so fast that some players can't even play without getting nauseous. The boss damage is great and deserves 9 out of 10. This build achieves high amounts of DPS capable of decimating even the big bosses in just seconds. Now for the survivability, I'll only give it 8 out of 10, even though this build still has almost 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion and spell suppression. I had to take 2 points out because they're always very close to enemies. And that's it for today, guys. Are you playing any of those meta builds? Please take a second to tell me in the comments and leave a thumbs up to support the channel. I wish you guys an amazing day and don't forget to keep building!